The cameras were rolling. The lights blazed hot above the studio, casting their intense glow on the set. Steve Harvey, in his signature three-piece gray suit, was effortlessly delivering another perfectly timed punchline, sending the audience into fits of laughter. Everything seemed normal, exactly as it had been for the last decade of Family Feud. The rhythm of the show was flawless, the timing impeccable. But then, just as the laughter reached its peak, something happened. A voice, raw and trembling, cut through the laughter, its urgency making the air shift. Steve's smile froze, and the audience, once full of joy, fell into a heavy, expectant silence. It was a moment that would change everything. In all his years on the show, Steve had never experienced anything like this. Leaving the stage without a word, he began walking toward the audience. This is where the story truly begins. At the podium stood the Johnson family, 5 members strong, buzzing with the kind of nervous energy only a game show could bring. It was their first time on television, and the weight of that moment hung in the air. Sarah Johnson, the team captain, was a 42-year-old teacher from Ohio. She had just won the coin toss and was ready for the fast money round. Steve, with his trademark twinkle in his eye and mischief in his voice, held the cue cards with practiced ease. "All right, Sarah," he said, addressing her in that signature voice millions of viewers knew and loved. "You ready to win $20,000 for your family?" Sarah nodded, her hands clasped together. The board behind Steve lit up, displaying the survey questions, waiting to reveal the answers. Everything was going according to plan. The audience leaned in, phones tucked away as per studio rules, eager to see who would claim the prize. But in row 7, seat 12, a man named Jason Chin sat with his hands gripping the armrest so tightly his knuckles turned white. For Jason, this moment wasn't about the game. The buzz of excitement around him seemed distant, muffled by his own thoughts. He had watched this show with his daughter, Emma, who had loved it. Or had loved it. The words still caught in Jason's throat, the weight of them as heavy as broken glass. Emma, his 27-year-old daughter, had passed away 3 months earlier after a long battle with leukemia. The cancer had stolen so much, her energy, her hair, her future, but never her spirit, never her love for Family Feud. Every afternoon, as Emma fought through her treatments, they would watch the show together. Emma, weak and tired, would laugh at Steve's antics, predict the answers, and dream about one day being on the show herself. "Dad," she'd said in one of their last conversations, her voice weak but full of determination. "If you ever get the chance to go to that show, you have to tell Steve something for me." Jason had promised her. Of course he had promised. You promise everything to a child, especially when that child is dying. As the Johnson family continued their run through the fast money round, Steve was in his element, delivering joke after joke, keeping the crowd energized. The studio buzzed with the electric energy of the show, but for Jason, none of that mattered anymore. He was no longer watching the game. He was watching Steve Harvey's face, searching for something. The words Emma had left him with, the promise he had made, echoed in his mind like a constant drumbeat. Suddenly, Jason stood. Not dramatically at first. He simply rose, pulled by an unseen force, stronger than the conventions of the show or the expectations of the audience. The man sitting next to him noticed first, his hand resting on Jason's arm gently, asking if he was okay. But Jason wasn't okay, and he would never be okay again. He had made a promise, though, and he was going to keep it. Steve was in the middle of revealing the final answer when he heard it. A voice different from the usual noise of the audience. It wasn't a cheer or a gasp. It wasn't part of the show. It was something else. Something that reached deep into him. "Mr. Harvey." The words were soft, quiet, yet filled with an intensity that cut through the rest of the noise. Steve paused, his hand halfway to pointing at the board. He turned his head, trying to locate the source of the voice. "Mr. Harvey, please." The producers in the control room straightened up, uneasy. This wasn't part of the script. The director's hand hovered over the button to cue the floor manager, but he hesitated. Steve, who had handled every unexpected moment thrown his way with legendary composure, felt the air shift. He looked toward the audience, sensing that this moment wasn't like any other he'd faced before. Jason stood fully now. People around him instinctively moved to give him space, as if they recognized that something sacred was unfolding. His face was streaked with tears, but his voice remained steady as he spoke. "I promised my daughter," he said, his words hanging in the air. The entire studio fell into a silence so heavy it felt like the breath of 100 people held collectively. Steve, the master of recovery and entertainment, found himself at a loss for words. He set his microphone down, breaking every unspoken rule of television production, and stepped off the stage. The floor manager moved forward, but the executive producer stopped him with a raised hand. "Let it play," he whispered, his voice tight. "Keep rolling." Steve made his way through the aisle, his shoes clicking sharply against the floor, his eyes never leaving Jason's face. The cameras followed him, catching every move, every second of what was happening. When he reached Jason, he stopped. "Sir," he said softly, his voice gentle, stripped of the microphone's amplification, but still powerful in its tenderness. "My daughter Emma," Jason started, his voice breaking on his daughter's name. He steadied himself, one hand pressed against his chest, where a small gold locket rested. Emma's locket. The one she had worn every day of her 27 years. Emma had watched Family Feud every day during her treatment. Despite everything the cancer had taken, the show had been a lifeline for her. "She wanted you to know," Jason continued, his voice faltering but determined, "that you gave her joy when there wasn't supposed to be any. That you made her laugh when the pain was unbearable, when she thought she'd forgotten how to laugh. Watching you was the 1 hour of the day when she wasn't just a cancer patient. She was just herself." Tears flowed freely through the studio, the Johnson family with their hands over their hearts, the opposing team in tears. Even Steve, who had built a career on never being caught off guard, was visibly moved. "What was her name again?" he asked, his voice thick. "Emma," Jason whispered. Steve nodded slowly, then did something that would become legendary in Family Feud history. He removed his jacket, the perfectly tailored piece of clothing that had accompanied him through many of his career's finest moments, and held it out to Jason. "This jacket," Steve said, his voice choked, "has been with me through some of the best moments of my career. I want you to have it. Because Emma..." He paused, his voice breaking. Emma was watching those moments too. Jason's hands shook as he accepted the jacket, the weight of it, the warmth still embedded in the fabric from Steve's body, feeling like a physical manifestation of the connection Emma had felt to Steve, someone she had never met. But Steve wasn't done yet. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his personal business card, something he never gave out on the show, and pressed it into Jason's hand along with the jacket. "You call me," he said, his voice low and sincere. "Not through an assistant, not through a network. You call me directly because I want to know more about Emma. I want to hear her favorite episodes. I want to know what made her laugh the hardest. Can you do that for me?" Jason could hardly speak, nodding as he clutched the jacket and the card tightly. Then, in a moment that broke all protocol, Steve opened his arms. Jason, overwhelmed, fell into them, and they stood there, a billionaire TV host and a grieving father, holding each other as the cameras captured this unscripted moment of pure humanity. For 30 seconds, or maybe longer, they stood there, a testament to the power of connection in the face of grief. When they finally separated, Steve wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and turned to address the audience. "We're going to take a minute here," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "This is bigger than the game right now." The producers in the control room made a decision to let it play, keeping all cameras live. This wasn't about television anymore. It was about something real. Steve turned to the Oxide Johnson family, still waiting at their podium, then to the opposing team. "I'm sorry to stop the game like this," he said, his voice shaky but genuine. "But sometimes we forget what we're really doing here. We're not just playing games. We're giving people a place to come together, to laugh, to celebrate family. And Emma, she understood that better than any of us." Sarah Johnson, the team captain, spoke up. "Mr. Harvey, we can wait. Take all the time you need." The opposing family captain nodded. "This is more important than any game." Steve smiled through his tears, a smile that had launched 1,000 memes. But this time it was different. It was more real, more vulnerable. "Let me tell you something about this job," he said, speaking now to the entire studio. "I've been blessed to do this for a long time. I've met thousands of families. I've given away millions of dollars. But every now and then, something happens that reminds you why you're really here." He turned back toward Jason, who was still holding the jacket, a smile now breaking through his tears. "Emma never got to be on this show," Steve said, his voice soft. "But she was here every day, in spirit. And today, through her dad, she finally got to tell me what she wanted to say. And I'm listening, Emma. Wherever you are, I'm listening." The audience erupted, not in the usual cheerful applause of a game show, but in a standing ovation that carried a depth of emotion, of shared grief and shared joy. Steve let it wash over him, then held up his hands for quiet. "Now we've got a game to finish," he said, a glint of his usual humor returning. "Because Emma would want us to finish the game. She wouldn't want us sitting here crying all day." The mood shifted, acknowledging the depth of the moment while still honoring the joy of the show. The Johnson family, energized by the emotions they had just shared, went on to dominate the final round, claiming the $20,000 prize. After the show wrapped, Steve didn't head to his dressing room like usual. He walked back to Jason, knelt beside his seat, and spoke quietly for 10 minutes. Though the cameras had stopped rolling, everyone in that studio knew they had witnessed something that would change their view of Steve Harvey forever. 3 weeks later, Steve dedicated an entire episode of his talk show to childhood cancer awareness. He wore a yellow ribbon, Emma's favorite color, and in his pocket, he carried a photo of Emma, bald from chemo, but smiling brightly, wearing a Family Feud t-shirt. The jacket never came back to Steve. He didn't want it back. It hung in Jason's living room next to Emma's photos, a reminder that sometimes the greatest gifts aren't given on game shows. They're given in moments when one person sees another's pain and chooses to step into it. Steve Harvey talks about that day in interviews. "That's when I understood," he says. "This show isn't about me. It never was. It's about the people who watch it, who need it, who find hope in it. Emma taught me that. Her dad taught me that. Some legacies are measured in ratings and awards. Others are measured in promises kept, in jackets given away, in the space between a stage and row 7, seat 12, where a game show host became something more, and a daughter's final wish came true."